Well, happy Halloween. I'm just sitting here having a bowl of Halloween pumpkin and meatball soup. Now, this is a pumpkin soup, and it's nice and creamy, a little bit of yogurt going through there. And then in the soup, are these little meatballs. So it's like you can tell the kids this is pumpkin and eyeball soup. Wink, wink. Meatballs. With a little bit of basil in them, and they've been cooking in the pumpkin soup. They're absolutely delicious. All right, let's go to the kitchen and make some right now. All right, we're ready to do the first part, which is make the soup for our pumpkin and meatball soup. What we have here is the squash. Now, this could be a pumpkin or acorn squash. I've started off with 1.5 pounds. By the time you scoop it out and you take off the rind, you've got 1 pound of pumpkin flesh. And this is all cut into pieces about a little bit under 1 inch or a little bit under 25 millimeters all around. 1 tablespoon of oil for cooking everything in. We have 1 onion that's been finely chopped. 2 cups or 1 15-ounce can of chicken stock. 2 teaspoons of dried basil, a half a teaspoon of salt, and a half a teaspoon of pepper. So, first thing we're going to do is we're going to fire up a small soup pot here. Put that at about medium heat. Toss in our olive oil. Should we get all that olive oil in there? Toss in the onions. Just gonna wait a second, make sure the oil's come to heat a bit here. Well, it's pretty quick. Yeah, there we go. All right, toss in the onions. Now just gonna stir the onions around in there just a little bit for about a minute or two. We just want to get them started first, get them softened up a little bit before we add all the other ingredients. I'll come back to that in 1 minute. All right, so that's been about a minute of the onions just cooking by themselves. Let's toss in the rest of the ingredients. So first, we're going to put in the pumpkin. We're going to add the basil, the salt, and the pepper. And then just before I add the soup stock, I'm just going to give those a quick stir around. Get everything mixed around here a bit. Smelling good already from those onions. All right, and going to pour in the soup stock. All right, now what we want to do is just bring that to a bit of a boil. So I might even turn the heat up just a little bit more. Just till it comes to a boil. Then we're going to turn it down and bring it to a simmer. All right, so it's been a little over a minute, and now it's starting to boil. I can see the bubbles starting to come up everywhere. So what we're going to do now, put on the cover, turn the heat down to more of a medium-low. Gonna let that simmer for 20 minutes. All right, while that's simmering away, perfect time to make the meatballs. So what we have here is a half a pound of ground meat. Again, my favorite, which is half beef, half pork, but you could do just pork, you could do just beef. Either is okay. Toss that into a slightly bigger bowl than we had here. Now, we have a half a cup of the panko breadcrumbs, or any breadcrumbs will do. Toss those in there. 1 teaspoon of dried basil, a 1/4 teaspoon of salt, a 1/4 teaspoon of pepper. Just gonna mix that into the meat a bit before we add the egg. All right, I love this thing. It's so great for just cutting through. If you're working with ground meat, it usually sticks together a bit. With this, you can cut, turn, and mix it in there. All right, let's get the egg in there. So we've got 1 egg. There we go. All right, now we're going to break the egg into there. Okay, now it's just mixing it until it all comes together nicely so you can roll your meatballs. All right, so we're going to see this is starting to stick together now. This is going to make good meatballs. Now, to make the meatballs, I have 2 tips for you. First, let's get a tray out here for putting the meatballs in. Now, to create a nice, we're going to create 1-inch or 25 millimeter meatballs. Try to keep them all uniform. We're going to roll them out on a cutting board. This is the meat cutting board. And one of the things you notice is if you have dry hands, meatballs always stick to them. So, wet the hands a little bit. Just get a little damp. And you have less problems with that. So I'm going to take about half the meat out here. I'm going to roll it up. And now, just like a rolling out dough, roll out the meatball until it's about 1 inch in diameter. That's about, that's still a little bit big. Let's get a little smaller. Get about that size there. And now, take our handy little tool, and we just cut at 1-inch intervals. Roll the meatball up in the hands. See, because the hands are wet, it's not sticking. Usually you end up with a sticky mess. Pop those in there, and just keep rolling. All right, there we go. 15 little meatballs ready to go in the soup as soon as the soup is finished cooking. So, saves you time. All right, that has been simmering away nicely. Basically, just about bubbling away there. And yeah, now the pumpkin is very soft. So what we're going to do is we're going to put the pumpkin into the blender and puree it. So basically grab this and just ladle into the blender. If you're brave, you can just pour it into the blender, but you do end up with a bit of a mess on the counter usually. So I like to ladle it in. This blender is great because it's got lots of capacity, so you can do one whole batch of soup at once. Smaller blender, you're doing this in batches, and it's a bit of a pain. This is much more fun, much more easier, much more quicker. Okay. If you got a couple little pieces of onion and stuff still in the bowl or in the pot here, doesn't matter, just adds a little texture to your soup. Now, one of the things with soup, you got to be very careful. It's very hot, so we want to give a little bit of air here. Cover like this, like with a towel, and slowly. All right, by slowly bringing it up to puree, instead of hitting the puree button first and boom, you have soup all over the place. We've slowly built up the speed. We don't end up with an explosion of soup, which nobody wants hot soup all over the kitchen. All right, now all we do, pour that back into the pot. Oh, that is looking delicious. All right, let's come back and add the meatballs. Okay, now we're ready to cook our meatballs. We're going to thin the stock down just a little bit, the soup a little bit, because it's a little thick always after you've pureed it. So now we'll add a cup of water, and we're going to bring the heat back up again. We're going to bring that back up to simmer so we can simmer our meatballs. Just stir that water in. Oh, there we go. That's going to be perfect consistency. Now as soon as this comes up to a simmer, in go the meatballs. All right, that's just starting to simmer. You can see around the edges there, it's starting to roll. So I'm going to turn this down to about medium low right now. Not all the way down because the meatballs are going to cool it down a bit when they hit the soup. Now, you could use a pair of tongs or something to put the meatballs in. I find using the hands is the gentlest way to get these in there, and just plop them in. Away go the meatballs. Got any sticking out like this? Just give them space somewhere. They're all going to fit in there. Okay, so that's our meatballs are in there. Now, what we're going to do, we're going to cover it. We're going to turn it down a little bit because it's already starting to come to a boil again. We want it just to simmer. We're going to let that simmer for a good 15 minutes. A little bit more is fine. 15 minutes and those meatballs will be ready. All right, so let's come back in 15 minutes. All right, let's have a look here. Look at that. They've been bubbling away in there for 15 minutes. The meatballs are floating at the top because they're cooked. So, I'm going to turn the heat off. Now, we're going to add one more thing. We're going to add some yogurt. I've got a half a cup of yogurt here. Pour that in there. Yogurt in pumpkin soup is just delicious. Absolutely fantastic. I don't think I've ever made pumpkin soup without adding yogurt to it. It just adds a richness and flavor to it. Goes perfectly with the pumpkin. And just kind of stir that in. Oh, that is going to be a beautiful soup. All right, so let's serve that up. Just ladle up some soup and some meatballs. A couple more meatballs in there. Halloween dinner. Okay, now, optional, but always nice to do, is have a little bit extra yogurt and just drizzle a little yogurt in on top there. See, like that? Kind of drizzle it through a bit. It just kind of adds the intrigue for Halloween, you know. Something floating in there. There's some white stuff. What are we drinking for Halloween? Or I could say, what are we eating? All right, enjoy. Have a happy Halloween. And remember, this isn't just for Halloween. You can eat this soup anytime. Now, if you go to the link appearing on the screen, you can get the free printable recipe on our website. You'll also find a real easy to follow along recipe infographic, which visually shows you steps in making this delicious Halloween pumpkin and meatball soup. So go print out the recipe, have fun making and eating this soup, and make cooking fun again with Kuma's Kitchen.